The video opens on a narrator sitting in a dimly lit, cozy room. A single lamp illuminates their face. The tone is calm, conversational, and deeply engaging. The pacing is deliberate, allowing for pauses and emphasis. All right, folks, pull up a chair and get comfortable, because the story I'm about to tell you tonight, it didn't come from some anonymous forum post or a dusty old book. This came to me directly from a man I've come to know, a former construction foreman named Mark. He doesn't do that work anymore. He can't. He was adamant that I use his real name. Said it was a small price to pay if it meant getting a warning out to the world. He didn't call it a ghost story. He called it a foundation horror. And after hearing his account, and after the digging I've done since, I understand the distinction completely. This isn't about what's in the house. It's about what the house is built on. It all started with a simple, high-pressure job. A custom build on a secluded, wooded plot of land off a place called Hemlock Drive. The client was a wealthy lawyer from out of state, wanted a sprawling vacation home, and he wanted it done yesterday. Mark's boss, a man named Frank, whose entire world was defined by bottom lines and punishing deadlines, had the crew on a brutal sun-up to sundown schedule. So on that fateful evening, when the sky suddenly bruised a deep purple and unleashed a hard, angry downpour that hammered the half-built frame, Frank didn't call it a day. He ordered them to work late, to at least get the subflooring in before the weekend was lost. So there they were, just three of them, trapped by the weather. Mark, his friend and colleague Luis, a veteran builder built like a fire hydrant, with hands like worn leather and the patience of a saint. And the new kid, Mikey, fresh out of trade school, his enthusiasm not yet worn down by years of back-breaking labor. The narrator leans forward slightly, the light catching his eyes. Now, a construction site at night is a completely different entity. The familiar, comforting smells of fresh sawdust and cut pine get washed away, replaced by something more primal. The scent of wet earth of petrichor, sure, but this was deeper, heavier. It was the smell of the ground itself being turned inside out, of secrets best left buried being exposed to the air. They had a couple of industrial floodlights set up, creating these intense artificial islands of harsh white light. But the shadows between them, those were absolute. They pooled deep, especially in the open maw of the foundation hole. A perfect 20-foot deep rectangle of pure, swallowing blackness, already beginning to fill with swirling rainwater. The sound of rain begins softly, subtly in the background, setting the atmosphere. The first sound was easy to dismiss, a low, grinding scrape that seemed to emanate from the very bottom of the foundation. Luis, ever the practical one, shrugged it off. Probably just the tarp shifting, he grumbled, his voice a low rumble. All this water, the ground's getting soft under it. Mikey laughed, a tight, nervous sound that didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of laugh you make when you're trying to convince yourself everything is fine. But about 10 minutes later, it came again, louder this time. A long, deliberate scrap, like a heavy stone being dragged across concrete, followed immediately by a soft, wet pat-pat pattering, the sound of thick mud being slapped against a wall. Okay, that ain't no damn tarp, Mikey whispered, his voice cracking slightly. His knuckles were bone white where he gripped his hammer. Luis, never one to be intimidated by a raccoon or a possum, snatched up a heavy-duty, metal-cased flashlight and strode, purposefully towards the edge of the foundation pit. Probably some scared, stupid animal fell in, he declared, more to himself than to them. He leaned over, clicking on the powerful beam and shining it down into the pit. The light cut through the darkness, dancing over the wooden forms, the glistening rebar skeletons, the puddles that were slowly merging into a small, dark lake. There's nothing, he started to say, but his voice caught in his throat. The beam had frozen on a section of the freshly poured concrete wall, down near the footings. It looked wrong. It was smeared with a dark, viscous mud, as if something with thick, sludgy hands had tried to climb it. And in the very center of that smear, pressed deep into the still-curing concrete as if it were wet clay, was a handprint. The narrator holds up his own hand, fingers splayed unnaturally wide. It was massive. The palm was too broad and the fingers, they were too long, splayed out like the legs of a grotesque starfish. But the most chilling detail, the one that made Mark's blood run cold even as he described it, was that it was perfectly, utterly smooth. No lines, no whirls, no texture of a skin pattern. It was a blank, featureless impression, like a seal pressed into wax by something that had no identity. "Bear," Mark stammered, the word feeling hollow and ridiculous even as he said it. "Gotta be a bear, right? A big one. Got its paws muddy?" Luis didn't answer. He just stood there, motionless, keeping the beam of light locked on that impossible print. And that's when the new sound started. It came from directly below them, rising up from the black water, a low, papery rustle. The sound of someone slowly, carefully, crumpling a heavy-duty grocery bag over and over again. Then the lights went out. All sound cuts out for a dramatic 2-second beat. Then the rain returns, louder and more intense. It wasn't a flicker. It wasn't a brownout. It was a total, absolute, and simultaneous death of every single source of light on the site. The floodlights, the string lights draped along the frame, the little utility lamp inside the porta-potty, everything. They were plunged into a roaring, rain-soaked darkness so complete it felt solid, a physical weight pressing in on them from all sides. Mikey let out a sharp, choked cry that was swallowed by the storm. "Generators flooded!" Luis yelled, his voice strained with a sudden edge of panic. "Stay put! Don't move! I've got a spotlight in my truck!" They heard his heavy boots squelch away into the churning mud, the sound quickly fading into the cacophony of the downpour. Mark and Mikey were left alone, blind and vulnerable in the heart of the storm. The rain was now the only sound, a deafening, million-drum static that isolated them completely. And then it wasn't. The papery rustling started again, closer now, much closer. It was definitely coming from the foundation, a dry, shuffling, insect-like sound that had no business existing in the middle of that drenching, tempestuous night. Mark fumbled frantically for his cell phone, his fingers clumsy and slipping on the wet screen. He finally managed to swipe it on, his heart hammering against his ribs, and thumbed the flashlight function. He swung the weak, bluish beam toward the source of the sound. The narrator's voice drops to a tense, hushed, almost whispered tone. The little beam from his phone was a pathetic, guttering candle against the immense, hungry darkness of the night. But it was enough. It was just enough. The light landed directly on the edge of the foundation, and something was coming out. Something was pulling itself up and over the wall. It was pale, a sickly, washed-out color, like old, dried-out bone, or parchment that had been left in a sunless attic for a century. Its shape was vaguely human, but the proportions were a nightmare of wrongness. The limbs were too long and thin, jointed in ways that seemed to defy simple anatomy. The torso was a stumpy, barrel-like thing, and it had no face. Where a face should have been was just a smooth, blank, uninterrupted expanse of that same papery, dry skin, stretched tight over an unseen structure beneath. It moved with a horrible, jerky grace, hauling its unnaturally light-looking body up and over the foundation, wall with a series of those wet, scraping sounds they'd heard earlier. It didn't have eyes, but Mark felt its attention, a wave of intense, focused awareness, lock onto them, and with its emergence came a wave of cold, dry air that cut through the storm's humidity like a knife, carrying a smell that made his stomach clench and his gorge rise, the smell of an open tomb, of ancient dust, of profound, desiccated decay. His brain simply broke. The rational part of his mind, the part that knew about bears and raccoons and flooded generators, short-circuited and went dark. He couldn't scream. He couldn't move. He couldn't even breathe. He was paralyzed, a statue holding a tiny, insignificant light onto this impossible, blasphemous thing that was now standing on the ground mere feet from them. It took a step forward, its long, thin legs moving with that same unsettling, crumpling paper rustle. Its head, that smooth, blank oval, tilted slowly to the side, a gesture of pure, alien curiosity that was more terrifying than any snarl or roar could ever be. Then salvation, or something like it. From the direction of the access road, Luis's truck roared to life. The engine turned over with a powerful growl, and instantly his high beams snapped on. Two brilliant, blinding swords of pure white light cut across the chaotic construction site, cutting through the rain and the darkness, and perfectly framed the creature in their searing glare. The narrator leans back, a look of grim, horrified satisfaction on his face. It recoiled, not with a scream, not with a snarl of anger. It was a silent, violent, almost spastic contortion, the reaction of a creature that had never known such intense, pure light. It twisted its entire body away from the blinding beams in a movement that was both fluid and deeply wrong. And with an impossible, skittering speed that defied its size, it scuttled backwards and dropped into the foundation hole, vanishing into the inky black water without a ripple, without a splash, without a single trace it was ever there. A moment later, as if on a delayed timer, the generator coughed, sputtered, and roared back to life. The floodlights flickered on one by one, bleaching the entire site once more in their harsh, artificial, and now profoundly comforting daylight. Luis came running back, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a terror Mark had never seen in the man before. "What in the holy name of God was that?" he gasped, his chest heaving.
I saw it.
"I saw it in my headlights." It was... Mikey was on his knees in the mud, vomiting violently, his whole body shaking. Mark just stood there, trembling uncontrollably. The light from his phone still pointed at the empty space where the thing had been, his mind a screaming, static-filled void. They didn't speak another word. They didn't pack a single tool. They just ran. They abandoned thousands of dollars worth of equipment, the generators, their lunches, everything. They piled into Luis's truck, and he spun the tires, spewing mud and gravel, speeding down the slick, darkened access road as if every demon in hell was clawing at the bumper. They called their boss Frank, from the fluorescent-lit safety of a roadside diner 20 miles away. They were soaked to the bone, shivering, their words tumbling over each other in a frantic, panicked jumble. Frank listened for a minute before cutting them off. He called them superstitious fools, said they'd been spooked by the storm and a confused, mangy bear. He said they were seeing things, that the generator fumes had gotten to them. He threatened to fire them all if they weren't back on site first thing in the morning, to secure his property. He was a man of the physical, tangible world. A world of nails, lumber, and deadlines. A world where things like the one they saw simply could not exist. They never went back. Luis packed up his family and moved to another state to work construction with his brother. Mikey quit the trade altogether, and last Mark heard was working in retail. Mark tried to forget. He buried the memory deep, telling himself it was a mass hallucination, a shared psychotic episode, brought on by stress and carbon monoxide from the generator. Anything his rational mind could latch onto to preserve his sanity. The narrator's expression becomes deeply, profoundly somber. He leans in close to the camera, his voice dropping to a confidential, grave tone. But the story doesn't end there. A little over a year later, a gnawing, morbid curiosity got the better of Mark. He looked up the Hemlock Drive property online. The house was finished. The photos showed a beautiful, modern A-frame with huge, picturesque windows, nestled perfectly among the pines. It looked like a dream. He found the real estate listing. The lawyer had sold it almost immediately after completion. The new owners were a young family from the next town over. Mark's heart started to thump, a heavy, dread-filled rhythm in his chest. He did a deep dive, falling down a rabbit hole of social media. He found the wife's public Instagram profile. There were pictures of them moving in, smiling, full of hope. Pictures of their little girl, a blonde-haired thing who couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, playing on a swing set in the sprawling backyard. And then he found it. The photo that proved it was all real, that his nightmare was someone else's waking life. It was posted just a week prior, a seemingly innocent shot of the little girl's room at night, bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight. Captioned, "First night in our new home. She's sleeping so soundly. Not a peep all night. Oh, blessed all the new beginnings." The little girl was asleep in her bed, surrounded by a menagerie of stuffed animals. The room was warm and cozy, but it was the reflection in the dark glass of the window that made Mark's blood freeze solid. Reflected in that window pane, clear as day, was the view from inside the room, looking out into the hallway. And standing in the doorway of the little girl's room, its tall, pale, lanky form almost filling the frame, was the thing. Its head, that smooth, featureless oval, was tilted in that same curious, predatory way he remembered so vividly. The narrator lets that image hang in the silence for a long, heavy moment. He takes a slow, deliberate breath. Mark closed the laptop. He never looked again. He told me that some foundations, you see, aren't just made of concrete and rebar. Some are dug into something else, something that sleeps in the earth, something old and patient and hungry that belongs to a world much darker and older than our own. And when you build on it, when you drive your posts into that soil, you're not just building a house, you're setting a table, you're ringing a dinner bell, and you never ever know what might come up from the darkness. Looking for a meal. This was Mark's story. This is his warning. And if you're ever looking at a new build or a house with a history you don't know, maybe just listen. Listen closely when the world is quiet. Listen for the scrapes that don't belong. Listen for the papery rustle in the silence of the night. Because the things that live in the foundations, they don't ever leave. They're just waiting, and they're always, always hungry. Outro music begins to fade in softly, a melancholic and eerie tune, as the narrator holds the audience's gaze for a final moment before the screen fades to black.